Hi, it's Dwyer. It's October 9th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, over a decade ago, I wrote a book, How to Bet on Boxing. It'd be substantially different today if I were to rewrite it, right? But at the time, I made an argument I had long believed in, right? And that argument was that if you're a gambler, you wanted to long term pay attention to the guys who yo-yo in weight, right? The guys who gain a lot of weight between fights, and then have to lose that weight before a fight. My argument at the time was that that messed with a boxer's punch resistance. That fighters who yo-yoed in weight weren't healthy. Maybe the guy got by the weigh-in. Maybe the guy was able to rehydrate. That works when you're in your early 20s. Right? That doesn't work as you get older. Sooner or later, your body starts rebelling against you. Right? History is replete with fighters who lost a lot of weight before a fight and ended up getting badly hurt in the fight. Jaron McClellan comes to mind in a great fight in which he knocks Nigel Benn out of the ring. Ben comes back in the ring and then is able to beat him. Right? McClellan, that was McClellan's last fight. Unfortunately, he suffered injuries. Well, let me just say, Cinco de Mayo, May 5th, 2007, you had the face of boxing, and that's who he was. Right? Privately, he had his demons. But understand, boxing's that rare sport where, an Ali could show up to a press conference with a woman, have reporters asking about his, wife, only to find out that Ali was still married to his wife. He was here publicly running the streets at a public event, right? His own press conference with a different woman. Right? Fight fans, we're cavalier. We accept fighters as they are most of the time. Right? You get the feeling too, some fighters aren't even that interested in fighting. Right? Carlos Monzon, I believe, only fights in Madison Square Garden once in his career. Right? Monzon was very happy fighting in Argentina. He was a guy who, you got the feeling, enjoyed the celebrity boxing gave him. You didn't get the feeling that Carlos Monzon was in love with boxing. Right? Sugar Ray Robinson openly told you he wasn't in love with boxing. Look online here, there's actually an interview of him where he flatly says that he never loved boxing. Right? But yet, both men are legends. Right? Both men are Hall of Famers. Both men had very hardcore fans. Well, on May the 5th, 2007, Oscar De La Hoya, the champ at 154 pounds, right? My wife's favorite fighter. He fought a guy who wasn't as popular as him. Right? De La Hoya was the cash cow at that point. De La Hoya owned Cinco de Mayo in Las Vegas at that point. He was the much bigger name. But in boxing, you have a group, we'll call them the boxing hardcore. These are insiders, right? Or hardcore fans who have looked at guys fighting And they will say, you know what, this lesser known guy over here is the better fighter. Understand, when De La Hoya fought Floyd Mayweather, Mayweather had never fought at 154. But yet, the gambling market against the cash cow had Mayweather as the minus 190 champion. Not champion, favorite. Right? Mayweather would become champion, but just understand, the betting market installed Mayweather as a big favorite against an incumbent champion. The betting market had De La Hoya at higher than a plus 150. Understand, the betting market was giving De La Hoya less than a 40% chance of defending his own title against a guy who had never fought at 154. So, of course, the fight took place. I can tell you, I was in the sports book at the MGM. The fight took place at the arena not far from the sports book at MGM. It was called, I believe, the MGM Garden Arena or something like that. Right? And it was a split decision in favor of the challenger, Floyd Mayweather. Right? That was the start of Mayweather taking over Cinco de Mayo in Vegas and becoming the biggest draw in the sport. Now, what's important, and I believe Terence Crawford understands this 100%. Right? Crawford famously did not insist on any kind of weight prohibition, rehydration clause requirements for his fight against Canelo. Right? He wanted Canelo to have no excuses. Well, just understand, the night of Mayweather against De La Hoya, Mayweather in his first fight at 154 against the reigning champ who was more popular than he was, came in weighing 150 pounds. Folks, he's 4 pounds less, and that's big. He's 4 pounds less than Oscar De La Hoya. He goes on to outbox De La Hoya. Right? I understand there's a De La Hoya side of the equation. Let's just say the De La Hoya side of the equation that believes De La Hoya was robbed isn't as loud as the Marvin Hagler side of the equation, who believes Hagler was robbed in the Ray Leonard fight. Right? I thought Floyd won the fight. I thought Floyd figured out that Oscar was really a one-handed fighter. Right? Oscar had a great, we'll call it 45. That's what they called it at the time. It wasn't quite a left hook. It wasn't a left uppercut. It was somewhere in between. Right? But there's a great sequence where Oscar backs up Mayweather to the ropes. And Mayweather, the smaller man, has the left hand defensed. And Oscar's throwing a right hand, right? Oscar's trying a two-handed attack. He just didn't have the pop in the right hand to bother Floyd Mayweather. Right? Mayweather actually smiles during the exchange. And you could tell there was a lot of chess going on. There was, silent communication between the two fighters of, hey, I got your left hand blocked. And player, I don't think you have enough else to bother me. Well, let me just say, you have a champ right now at 147. Right? He's had to give up the belts because he's moving up to 154. Right? But you have a stunner here. This is the fight happening in Philly this weekend. right? Jaron Ennis, who I've put on my short list of the very best in the sport pound for pound. He's fighting not an Oscar De La Hoya at 154, right? He's fighting Usman Lima, who is a promising fighter at 154, but Ennis is a big favorite in the fight. In fact, he's an overwhelming favorite in the fight, right? Lima has not held the title. Now, I was wondering, how is Ennis going to do with the weight gain? Let me let you in on a secret in boxing. Punchers age more slowly, right? You know, a George Foreman could regain the heavyweight title in his mid-40s because Foreman was relying on punching power. A punch, as they say in the sport, is the last to go. Right? I would argue that it's timing. It's your legs, which they say is the first to go. Right? With your coordination that go first. Now that's the way it's been through history. But in the last half century, you have had a big swing, haven't you? Right? Usyk now, who relies on a lot of coordination and movement and feints, is in his late 30s. Right? Understand, fighters like Ali, Joe Louis, they were finished when they were Usyk's age. Usyk's unbeaten. Right? Understand that because, in part, the Olympics started allowing professional athletes to play in the Olympic Games. Right? Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Kevin Durant. Because they can actually now play in the Olympic Games, star athletes don't have the all or nothing dilemma that they had back in the day. Right? You know, just understand, you know, now once you can be an amateur longer and feed your family, right? You have a lot of guys getting into sport now later rather than earlier, right? Because you could set yourself up. You can play in international competitions, right? I believe that the timeline in the sport has shifted somewhat. Well, let me just say this. Jaron Ennis is coming up to 154. He's a guy who relies on athleticism, timing, foot movement. He's not a guy who's going to stay in the pocket and duke it out with you. Right? He's going to try to create a mobile pocket. Even against come forward fighters like Stanionis. Right? Even when Ennis is going to the body, he's going to be moving a bit. He's going to be episodic in the pocket. Now, it's a shocker. They had a pre-fight event where, of course, you know, Ennis and Lima tried to look tough, right? They had a face-off. This is a boxing tradition. Everyone wants to look tough. Everyone wants to pretend that this time it's personal. Right? You know, they want the other guy to know you're not going to intimidate me and stuff like that. And it was shocking. Truly shocking. Ennis, who you thought could have dessert, who you thought, you know what, he'll be able to not have to sweat out those last few pounds. You thought he would come in looking healthier. Right? After all, this guy, just a few weeks ago, was training with Canelo. Right? It's not like this guy was running the streets, hitting bars and stuff like that. No, the guy has been in the ring with some of boxing's best in recent weeks. Well, he showed up to this event, right? He has to fight this weekend. He has to be close to fighting weight. And folks, he looked thin. Too thin. He looked gaunt. Right? He looked like a guy who had been homeless for a few days last week. He didn't look like himself. Right? This is the reason why you look at weigh-ins. And we're not even at the weigh-in yet. Right? You see a guy and he doesn't look like himself. Right? You're looking at the guy and you're saying, man, this guy looks thirsty. He looks malnourished. Right? We've all seen that weigh-in where the minute the guy gets off the scales, he's reaching for water. Right? You know, I once saw James Toney fight. Tony won the fight, and after the fight, in the ring, they said, James, what are you going to do next? Words to that effect. And James said, and you didn't get the feeling he was a paid spokesman or anything, James said, I'm going to go to Burger King. He was that hungry. Well, let me just say, and Tony, of course, goes up to heavyweight, fights Evander Holyfield. Just food for thought, right? This is a guy who, you know, fought Roy Jones in middleweight, just to give you an idea on the swing. So Jaron Ennis, folks, he's having problems making weight at 154 pounds. This is the opposite of Floyd Mayweather, who, of course, retires 50-0, is beating people like Andre Berto at the end. Right? Floyd, who was always in shape. Right? Mayweather didn't even have to make it to the weight to beat a reigning champ at the higher weight. Another guy who sometimes would come in 2-3 pounds under the weight limit, Manny Pacquiao. Right? Pacquiao's in such great shape that he returned to the sport well into his 40s. His opening fights against a reigning champion, Mario Barrios, and Pacquiao gets a draw. Many of you thought Pacquiao got robbed. Many of you felt that Pacquiao won the fight. Right? And that's Pacquiao in his 40s. Another guy who would come in, sometimes weighing, 2 pounds below his own weight limit, was Bernard Hopkins. And of course, Hopkins, after he finishes his middleweight career, goes up to light heavy and is energized, is able to stick around light heavy, is able to beat reigning champion Antonio Tarver, is able to go on and do things. Right? Wasn't that him against Jean Pascal? So Jaron Ennis has me concerned. Now, don't get me wrong. He's in his 20s. He's bulletproof. Right? But just understand, he was fighting well below his weight at 147. Folks, he looks weight drained at 154. Weight drained. He's fighting a puncher. He's fighting a guy who the claim is, if you get inside on him, you'll have success. But understand, if you get inside on a puncher, you're at risk. A lot could go wrong. If you don't know what you're doing and you back away a little bit lackadaisically, you could get hit with a big shot. And if your body is weight deprived, this is even after your rehydration, your body might not be able to take the shot. Right? One wonders, given how thin Ennis looked at this promotional event, one wonders how long Ennis is going to last at 154, a loaded division, where Fundora is fighting Keith Thurman, where Virgil Ortiz is fighting Erickson Lubin. Right, folks? These are all opponents who would give spirited matches against Ennis. These are all potentially big paydays. I haven't even gotten to Murtazaliev, who has about Xander Zayas, who has about, right? You thought that Ennis at 154 had a runway of paydays ahead of him. Right? Understand, too, in boxing you have bumps. Even if he lost to one of these guys, you thought, okay, that's what rematches are for. Right? Not only that, let's say he lost to a guy and he doesn't have a rematch clause. That might make him a more appealing opponent to someone else. 154 looks so juicy. One wonders whether Pacquiao, who's been a champ at 154 before, one wonders if Pacquiao is going to say, hey man, I'm an older guy who's already in the Hall of Fame. In other words, Pac's not hoping to get there. He's already there. You know, an OG might say, hey, okay, you know what? I saw Boachuk, who is at 154. I saw Boachuk drop Virgil Ortiz twice. Right? Ortiz is unbeaten, who knows how, because I had him losing that fight on my scorecard. You know, Pacquiao might say, hey, if Ortiz wins his next fight, why wouldn't I go for the payday? As it is, he's supposed to fight Rolly Romero, a champ, at 147. But Ennis might be out of the running. Let's say Ennis wins this fight. I understand Ennis wants a title at 154. It's better for marketing. Right? You say, oh, you know, my fighter won a belt at 147, won a belt at 154. Now here he is at 160, right? But folks, after a while, your body stops listening to you. Right? How many people do you know still fit in the clothes they wore in college or in high school? The answer for most of us is not many. Right? The fact that Ennis hasn't even fought at 154 and already looks weight drained at promotional events should give all of us pause. Right? I mean, folks, he's going to be getting hit by bigger men. If he's weight drained and can't take the shot, and let me point out, one of my laments about Jaron Ennis is he has been getting hit lately in fights. Right? If Ennis gets hit by a 154 guy with a punch who's able to extend his arms, and Ennis is a little bit weight drained for the fight, this is even after the rehydration, bad things could happen. Let me go further too, and let's get into the weeds here. Ricky Hatton, and I don't know the details, right? That story's been hushed up a bit. But Ricky Hatton, who suffered from depression, who yo-yoed between fights, right? Who, you know, according to reports, loved to go out. Right? Hatton was a guy who was a man about town. You got the feeling that he loved the adulation that boxing gave him. Right? Ricky Hatton recently died. He died young. He died in his 40s. You know, this is really more of a common sense type thing than anything else. I believe the Floyd Mayweathers of the world, the Manny Pacquiaos of the world, guys for who these weigh-ins are a non-event. And it wasn't always that way with Floyd, right? There's stories of Floyd, you know, having to do a lot to make weight when he was, you know, at lower weight classes. But by the time Mayweather gets to 154, Mayweather could show up even against a tough opponent like Oscar De La Hoya, a Hall of Fame level opponent. Right? De La Hoya is in the Hall of Fame today. 4 pounds underweight. right? You get the feeling that a guy like Mayweather, a guy like Crawford, not the Crawford of 4 weeks before the fight, who every 5 minutes seemed to be posing without his shirt on to show us the weight gain, but the Crawford who actually showed up on fight night. You get the feeling these guys are confident enough in their skills where they don't have to be the heavier guy in the ring. Right? But then you have another group, and I think it's a high wire act. I don't even know how people are able to pull off this lifestyle. Right? We'll call it the Keyshawn Davis lifestyle, where you are well over fighting weight. Wasn't that what Davis was for a recent fight that got canceled against De Los Santos? Right? Wasn't Davis something like 4 pounds overweight or something like that? I don't understand these guys who are training for fights at weights several pounds below where they are. And then they're hoping that by starving and cutting water right before the weigh-in, that they're going to make weight. Right? Wasn't Davis the champion at the time? Isn't that how Davis lost his belt? Now, Ricky Hatton, all I could say was Ricky was planning on making a comeback. Right? But you understood. It would be a little bit different than a Manny Pacquiao comeback. Pacquiao, freak athlete. Faster hands than 99% of the fighters I've seen. Right? Blinding hand speed. Always in shape. Natural athlete. Great legs. You know, you would think that he had springs for legs. He's jumping around the ring and stuff like that. You know, there are certain fighters who you think, hey, if we were to have a decathlon instead of a boxing match, I'm guessing Manny Pacquiao would run faster than most boxers, jump higher than most boxers, right? Be stronger than most boxers. Ricky Hatton, because Ricky yo-yoed in weight, I have my doubts. I believe that when you have to be the bigger man in the ring, when you need the mental security blanket of coming in the ring and thinking, hey, this fight's at 154, I was weighing 170 a few days ago. I'm the bigger man in this fight. I think we should all be concerned. Right? What I want to encourage people to do is to look hard. The weigh-ins ahead of us, right? Today is the 9th. I believe the fight's on the 11th. This is a weigh-in you don't want to miss. I think Ennis is so talented. Ennis wins this fight anyway. But you have to look at this weigh-in and you have to think about the rest of 154. Right? If Ennis is weight drained, how much longer before that weight draining starts to catch up with him? Right? That's the way boxing works. You look at guys and you say, wow, this guy has it all. What's going to trip him up? And then you find out Mike Tyson is attending beauty pageants. Right? You know, then you find out that, you know, Ray Robinson was playing more golf before the Turpin fight than he was training in the gym. You know, you see a guy and he looks unbeatable. Then the guy starts to fade and you find out that, you know, Joe Frazier's blind in one eye. Right? Some fighters have brittle hands. I saw Floyd Mayweather in a fight. He had his father back in his corner. There's a round where Floyd, who had a poker face, comes back to the corner. Dad saw through the poker face. And Dad looked at him and said, "Your hands." And Mayweather just nodded. Right, folks? Jaron Ennis has the world on a string. He's on my pound for pound list. Right? Canelo needed a sparring partner who could imitate one of the best fighters we've ever seen. Canelo picked up the phone, apparently, and called Jaron Ennis. Right? The question with Ennis is a weight question. Is his body going to cooperate with him long enough for him to fight the slew of fighters in a loaded 154 weight class? Let me say this, and I say it diplomatically. If Ennis jumps to 160, and maybe that's the weight class where he actually belongs, as the weight-drained Hamza Shiraz crowd knows, right? Because Shiraz looked like a guy who was weight-drained, right? I thought he's winning the fight, and then things start to fall apart in the second half of the fight, right? No doubt his body was saying, player, you should treat us better. You should feed us more. Carlos Adames kept coming at Hamza Shiraz, didn't he? Right? You were looking at rounds like the 8th round, the 9th round, and Adames was still at a full tank. Shiraz was fading. What happens if Adames comes after not Hamza Shiraz, but Jaron Ennis? I'm just saying, too, if Ennis goes up to 160, you have another guy who I think is among the very best in the sport, pound for pound, Janibek. Right, folks? Janibek has stamina. Janibek has a punch. Janibek's going to try to set up a pocket on Jaron Ennis. Right, now I'll agree. I know there's another crowd. I'll mention them here. The Denzel Bentley crowd. Right? I believe Bentley just happens to be Janibek's boogeyman. Right? Let's remember, Iran Barkley beat Thomas Hearns twice. Right? Some guys just have another guy's number. Right? Vernon Forrest beat Prime Shane Mosley twice. Right? It happens. I'm not sure if Bentley is that good, but he is that good against Janibek. Let's just say if Ennis goes up to 160 and doesn't have the security blanket he apparently has had for years of knowing that he walks around much heavier, that he's the naturally bigger man in the ring, if he loses that, how good will he be? Those are the questions to ask ahead of this weigh-in for his fight against Lima. Talented guy, but he looks to me to be weight drained. This is not the guy showing up with a surplus who could gain 4 pounds and still make weight. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours. I hope you leave them in the comment section of this YouTube video. Let me say this too, and kudos to this guy. David Benavidez was asked about a fight at 168 against Terence Crawford. Right? Lord knows Benavidez would get a lot of money for that fight, as you could imagine. Right? Benavidez flatly refused. Right? Because Benavidez knows his body. Benavidez used to be the champ at 168. He knows what that's like. Right? He's been 168 for a part of his life. But now he understands he belongs at 175. He understands that losing weight to fight a Terence Crawford could be hazardous for your health. So Benavidez has declined that fight. He's declined the big paycheck that would have been with that fight. Let me just say, had he taken the money, that would have been the most expensive money he had ever taken in his life. Right? Because, of course, Benavidez is an unbeaten fighter. You don't want to lose that O by fighting out of weight when you know you're going to have a problem making weight. Food for thought. I look forward to your comments. Thanks for stopping by.